At 80 years old, Michael Douglas stands as a titan of Hollywood history, a man whose very name carries the weight of a multi-generational dynasty. For over 2 decades, he and Catherine Zeta-Jones have been presented to the public as the industry's ultimate fairy tale, a story of a legendary leading man and a radiant Welsh starlet who defied a 25-year age gap to build a life of seemingly untouchable glamour. They are the fixtures of every high-profile red carpet, the golden couple toasted by the likes of Steven Spielberg and Anthony Hopkins, appearing to live behind the literal and metaphorical golden gates of happiness. But as Michael enters his 9th decade, the silence he maintained for 20 years has finally begun to crack. The truth that is now emerging is not one of simple Hollywood scandals or tabloid fodder, but a far more haunting account of what Michael himself describes as a golden cage. Behind the flashing lights and the practiced smiles of the Plaza Hotel, there existed a darkness that the public was never meant to see. It is a narrative defined by the crushing pressure of fame, the isolating reality of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and the volatile storms of bipolar disorder that turn their private residence into a cold battlefield. Michael has reached a point where he no longer fears public opinion or the predatory nature of the tabloids. He is speaking now to free himself from the burden of a marriage that, while rooted in love, often felt like a test of human endurance. This investigation moves past the curated perfection of magazine covers to explore the horrors of a life lived under a microscope, where love was frequently trapped by expectations and 2 fragile souls were forced to navigate their deepest traumas while the entire world clapped for their performance. This is the story of how Michael and Catherine didn't just win at marriage, but how they learned to survive the wreckage of their own success. The story of Michael and Catherine began not in Hollywood, but in the glowing lights of the Deauville Film Festival in northern France during the autumn of 1998. At the time, Michael Douglas was 54 years old, a seasoned veteran of the industry who was physically and emotionally weathered. He was fresh out of back surgery and struggling to pull himself out of the deep-seated addictions that everyone in Hollywood whispered about, but no one dared to mention publicly. Into this vulnerable moment walked Catherine Zeta-Jones, a 29-year-old rising star whose performance in The Mask of Zorro had just turned her into a global obsession. Catherine entered the room with a striking confidence that seemed to make time skip a beat, her dark hair and bright eyes captivating the room. Michael, who had spent a lifetime surrounded by the world's most dangerous femme fatales and famous actresses, felt something different in her. A gaze where pride and pain lived side by side. It was here that he famously uttered the line that would become the cornerstone of their legend. Within 30 minutes of meeting her, he looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm going to be the father of your children." Through the lens of modern scrutiny, that moment is often debated. Was it a romantic prophecy, or the calculated pursuit of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted? At the time, Catherine didn't smile. She simply told him he should wake up before saying things like that, and walked away. However, the persistence of Michael Douglas was relentless. He sent flowers and messages through mutual friends until he secured a dinner in the quiet isolation of Aspen, far from the noise of the press. In these raw moments, they found a connection that felt like a source of light before a storm. But even as they fell in love through hundreds of letters and late-night phone calls, the foundation was being laid for a complex power dynamic. Catherine had made him promise never to make her feel like she was just another part of his story. Yet as they headed toward a wedding at the Plaza Hotel, the sheer gravity of the Douglas name was already beginning to pull her into his orbit. Behind the golden couple image was a family dynamic strained by 2 generations of Hollywood legacy. Michael Douglas often spoke of the extremely long shadow cast by his father, Kirk Douglas, whom he described as film star first, father second. This cycle of parental absence and the pressure to find an identity under a legend repeated itself with Michael's eldest son, Cameron. The height of Michael and Catherine's early marriage was severely tested by Cameron's spiral into drug addiction and subsequent legal battles. In 2010, as the couple faced Michael's cancer diagnosis, Cameron was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for drug trafficking. Michael publicly assumed blame for being a bad father admitting he was too consumed by his career during Cameron's youth. This period became a horror of competing traumas. Michael sat ashen-faced in court as a judge told him to stop viewing Cameron as a victim of his dysfunctional childhood. The pressure of Cameron's incarceration became an incredible cross to bear for the family. Despite the chaos, Catherine was the one who never gave up, acting as a bridge when Michael was too paralyzed by guilt to act. The unspoken truth of this era was that Michael and Catherine were not just dealing with the typical hurdles of a new marriage. They were navigating a legacy of addiction and neglect that threatened to pull their entire foundation apart. Michael's realization at 80 is that the glamour of the Douglas name was often paid for with the emotional stability of those he loved most. In 2010, the golden cage of the Douglas marriage was struck by a dual health crisis that Michael describes as a wild 6-month ride through hell. It began with Michael's diagnosis of stage 4 throat cancer, later clarified to be at the base of his tongue. The man who had always been the anchor of the family was suddenly fighting for his life through grueling rounds of radiation and chemotherapy. Catherine watched in horror as the husband who was never tired lost 40 pounds and withered under the fatigue of the treatment. But as Michael battled the physical tumor, a psychological storm was gathering over Catherine. She has since admitted that she was a mess behind the scenes, describing the emotional ordeal as a traffic pileup where everyone close to the patient is forced to a screeching halt. In 2011, the world was stunned to learn that Catherine had checked into a mental health facility for bipolar II disorder. The horror of this period was the realization that their struggles were inextricably linked. Stress is a classic trigger for bipolar episodes, and the year of dealing with Michael's potential death and his son's incarceration had pushed Catherine's mental health over the edge. For Michael, the recovery period wasn't a time of peace. It was a slippery slope of managing his own post-treatment depression while trying to support a wife who was navigating the cycles of high and low moods. They were two people drowning in the same room, yet unable to reach for one another because they were both gasping for air. By August 2013, the foundation of Hollywood's most resilient marriage finally buckled. After 13 years of marriage, a spokesperson confirmed the unthinkable. Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones were taking some time apart to evaluate and work on their marriage. This was not a sudden explosion of infidelity, but rather a quiet exhaustion. They had simply run out of gas after years of being under a constant sword of uncertainty. The separation lasted 8 grueling months. Michael attended the Emmy Awards solo, while Catherine sought privacy to continue her treatment. While they were apart, rumors swirled that Catherine was preparing for a massive divorce settlement. However, neither star filed legal documents. The horror of this year was the realization that their marriage had become a one-way street where they were no longer truly communicating. Michael spent nights walking through Central Park, feeling like a stranger in his own life, while Catherine sought the solace of her parents' long marriage as a blueprint for survival. It wasn't until early 2014 that the silence began to break. Michael famously stated that he was crazy about her and realized that a relationship cannot be fixed if one person is already out the door. They didn't reconcile because of a grand romantic gesture, but because they reached a point of sincere admission. They were two broken souls who were too tired to keep hurting each other. The 25-year age difference has been a co-star in their public narrative since the very beginning. At the start, the gap was purely visual. Catherine famously dismissed the skepticism of the era, noting that she viewed it as a journey of learning. However, as Michael reaches 81 and Catherine enters her mid-50s, the math has transformed into a complex domestic reality. Recent reports suggest a significant shift in their family dynamics now that their children have grown and moved out. While Michael has signaled a desire to slow down and effectively scale back on work, Catherine is entering a high-energy phase of her career. Sources indicate that Michael's aging has made him more dependent on Catherine for companionship, leading to moments where he feels like a shadow in his own home. The horror for Michael at 80 is the fear of becoming invisible to the woman who was once his greatest source of pride. He reportedly panics that she is building a brand new life that has no place for him, while she finds his newfound clinginess frustrating. Despite these shifts, they remain independent spirits who have outlasted every premature obituary for their relationship by learning to navigate the physical and professional contrasts that come with aging at different speeds. As the calendar turns to early 2026, Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones have done what most predicted they never would. They have reached the silver milestone of 25 years. In the icy isolation of Antarctica, far from the frantic energy of Hollywood, the image of the Douglas family appears more united than ever. At 81, Michael has stopped fighting the ghosts of his past. He has finally accepted that the golden cage of fame only has power if you allow it to separate you from the people who stood by you when the world went dark. The true legacy of Michael Douglas is not found in his Oscars, but in the resilience of a marriage that survived stage 4 cancer, a mental health battle, and the incarceration of a child. Catherine remains the vibrant partner who shares his birthday and his stubborn refusal to give up. Their story serves as a stark reminder that even in a world of curated perfection, real love is messy and often painful. It is the courage not to let go when every logical reason tells you to walk away. Michael's 80-year confession is simple. The horrors were real. The pain was deep. But the person waiting at the end of the storm made every second of the struggle worth it. If you found this deep dive into the lives of Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones moving, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Memories of the Stars for more investigative reports on the legends you love. What do you think is the secret to their 25-year survival? Was it destiny or just sheer grit? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter of Hollywood's untold history.